Adding camera shake to one of your 3D compositions is one of the best ways to add another layer of cinematography. However, if you do it wrong, you can leave your audience feeling nauseous. So let's look at the correct way to do it in Blender. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here on the CG Cookie Blender Training YouTube channel. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at how to create realistic camera shake in Blender. There are lots of different ways that you can add camera shake to one of your compositions, but I find this way to be the most effective, most realistic, and the easiest to work with. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right in. This is a composition I made for a promotional video for my add-on, Atom Bomb, which helps you get rid of extra data in your project files. Go check it out, it's on the Blender Market. But anyway, yeah, so this is from a promotional video called Jim, and it's basically just this character Jim sitting at his computer, using it sparsely, and I want a nice, smooth, sweeping shot of him sitting here. So in order to do that, first I need a camera in this scene, because I don't have one. So I'll press Shift A and select Camera. Then I'm going to position the camera accordingly. So I'm going to press numpad 0 to go into camera view mode, Shift F to go into fly camera mode, and I'll use the WASD keys to position this accordingly in a way that's cinematically appealing. We'll go right about there. All right. So one of the most important things that you have to do in order to use this method is to set a keyframe on your camera. I'm going to press, actually I'm going to animate my camera. You don't have to animate your camera. If you just want a static camera with some camera shake, that's fine. You'll only have to add one keyframe, but I'll get into that more in a second. So I'm going to go to frame 0. I'm going to press I to add a keyframe and select Lock, Rot, Scale. This will add a location, rotation, and a scale keyframe. However, we're only going to be using location and rotation, but you know, I like to add the extra just in case. So I added the Lock, Rock, Scale keyframe to our composition, and now I'm going to scrub down the timeline to frame 200, and I'm going to reposition the camera in another location. In this case, we'll go right about here. And then I'll press I again, choose Lock, Rot, Scale. So now I have this simple sweeping camera motion, zooming in on Jim doing his work, which is exactly what I was aiming for. So, if you only want to add one keyframe, that's fine. Your camera doesn't have to be animated. It just has to have one keyframe set, and that keyframe can be set anywhere. This will allow us to use the graph editor, which is the next step. So, I'm going to split my window by coming down by these 3 little lines in the corner here, clicking and dragging upward. This will split my window vertically. I'm then going to change the top window into a graph editor window. And you'll notice when we change it into the graph editor window, we have all these curvy lines. And if you're familiar with the graph editor, great. If you're not, I know it's not a super common thing, especially for people who aren't too in tune with animation. It looks pretty intimidating right now, but I'll simplify it and break things down. So the first thing I want to talk about is what makes camera shake look realistic. How does a camera shake in the real world? Well, I've got my phone right here, and if I were to want a nice, smooth, sweeping shot, I can see that the camera does a few things. When I'm moving it, I'll slowly bob it up and down accidentally, just like completely unintentionally, right? So we'll need a change in our composition here. We'll need to replicate this up and down motion. That's one of them. The second thing is, no matter how much I try to pan it smoothly, it does stutter a little bit. So this is going to be very exaggerated, but it'll be like slow down a little bit, move a little bit, you know, just like that. So we'll have to replicate that as well. Finally, what we'll have to do is replicate rotation. And when I'm holding this camera, right, there are 2 ways that this can move. It can move like a steering wheel kind of, and that can also pivot back and forth. Those are the 2 main rotations that we're going to be replicating in this. So first we need to get a bearing on the axes of our camera. So I'm going to first try and replicate that up and down movement that we saw with my phone here. So in this case, the up and down movement is going to be along the Z axis of our camera. So in order to do this, I'm going to add a noise modifier to the curve of our camera here. So in order to do that, I'm going to, in our graph editor with the camera selected, drop down this Lock, Rot, Scale section here. And you can see that we have XYZ location, XYZ Euler rotation, and then XYZ scale. We won't really need XYZ scale because we're not going to be like working with it at all. So I'm just going to click the eyeballs to get rid of that so we don't see it over here in our graph editor. Additionally, we're only going to be working with the Z location, so that's the up and down movement, and then in this case, the camera's forward and backward movement would be across the x-axis, right? Because the camera is moving like that. So the hesitation, I guess, will be on the x-axis. So we won't have to worry about y location at all. So I'm going to hide that one as well. Finally, we're only focusing on the steering wheel type rotation, which in this case would be around the y-axis here, and also the up and down rotation, which is going to be across the x-axis here. We aren't going to worry too much about the z rotation because that doesn't really do much. So I'm going to hide the z rotation, leaving us with just the x and z location, then the x and y Euler rotation. If your camera's facing in a different direction, you might have to choose different axes, but it's mostly just to identify the 4 different locations: the up and down movement, left and right hesitation, forward and backward rotation, left and right rotation. So I'm going to start by doing the up and down motion, as I said earlier. So that is editing the Z location. In order to do this, in order to add a noise modifier to make it a little bit bumpier, right, we're going to select the Z location keyframe over here on the left. We're going to press N. We're going to press N to open up the properties panel over here. We're going to select modifiers off this list, and we're going to add a modifier and add a noise modifier. Now you can see our line here has a bunch of bumps across it, especially when compared to like the green line here or the red line here. Those are nice and smooth. This one is all jagged. And if we play it, you'll notice that the camera spazzes up and down like crazy. And if we go into camera view, it's just absolutely shaky and scary shaky almost. So we have to kind of dial this down. Over here we have some settings in our noise modifier. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the scale. And what the scale will do is it will change out how big the waves are of the noise modifier. So in this case, it's still pretty shaky, but it's a little bit smoother now because there's more space between the peaks. Additionally, I'm going to drop the strength down to somewhere around 0.1. Oops, sorry, 0.1. No, it's not. Oh, I don't have num lock on. 0.1. There we go. So this already, you can see, is starting to add a nice little touch to it. It still looks a little bit too shaky to me. So I'm going to change the scale to somewhere around 18. And now you can see we get this nice slow bob that is very, very slightly noticeable, right? We don't want any of these to accommodate for all of the motion or all of the camera shake that we have. We want it to be just a little bit shaky. And that's exactly what we have going on here, which is perfect. So now let's add that left and right hesitation. In order to do this, we do the same exact thing that we just did for the Z location. So I'm going to select the X location, click Add Modifier, select Noise, and again our camera starts to spaz out, so we have to change the scale up. I always like to set the scale to different things, or different numbers for every single different keyframe that we're working with. So for the Z location, I chose 18. For the X location, I chose 20. It just helps ruin the consistency of randomness, if that makes any sense. I'm also going to, again, drop the strength down to somewhere around 0.1. That way we get this nice, mostly smooth, but still with some basic hesitations in it, which is perfect. That looks really good. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is work on rotation. We're going to add that forward and backward and left and right rotation. So I'm going to start with the X rotation, which is our up and down rotation. So I'm going to do the same thing again with this. I'm going to click Add Modifier, add a Noise Modifier, and holy cow, that is crazy. So we'll change the scale up to 20. One thing that you should keep in mind is rotations are always more powerful when it comes to like how much it shakes the camera, because as you can see here, it looks like somebody's just sitting there nodding their head like crazy. So we're going to change the strength all the way down to 0.01, which will give a very, very subtle nod up and down, which is exactly what we want. I'm also going to change the scale up to 21, again, just to ruin that consistency of randomness. All right, last thing we're going to change is the Y Euler rotation. So we'll add a noise modifier to it, change the strength to like 19. I don't think I've used that number yet. Now it looks like we're on a boat rocking back and forth, and it's making me seasick, so 0.01 for the strength. Actually, maybe 0.025. So one thing I always do before rendering an animation is I do an Opengl render. If you guys don't know what an Opengl render is, it's basically you see what's in the viewport, except you see it in a more fleshed out fashion. You can see it full screen and stuff like that, and it makes sure that it locks it at whatever frame rate you're working with. All right, and then to do an Opengl render, we come up to the render tab here and select Opengl Render Animation. And now our entire animation will be rendered in Opengl. It does take a little bit longer than it would just playing it in the viewport, but ultimately it's really not that bad. And we are possibly done. There we go. Okay, so in order to actually view our Opengl rendered animation, we could either exit to the desktop and just watch it like a normal video, or we could just use the built-in player, which I prefer. So I'm gonna click render and then play rendered animation. And now you can see that we have, if I make this full screen here, this nice realistic camera shake in our scene. And if the stupid GeForce Experience thing would go away, that would be fantastic. So because I think this is looking pretty dang good, I'm gonna go ahead and ship it off to the render farm, and what you're seeing right now is the final result. Anyway, I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful. If you did, be sure to hit subscribe down below, that way you get notified every week when we upload these here on the CG Cookie Blender Training YouTube channel. Until then, keep it real. If you're looking to expand your Blender knowledge to the max, become the ultimate Blender head, check out cgcookie.com and hook yourself up with a subscription. Wes brought his chair from the back up here into this desk, so now I can just like spin for days, boys. I'm already stopping, but I tried.